Let's get it.
I love you, Bobby.
Hey, V, line them up.
What's up, CBR family? Look who's here on time. Keno, I better
Hey,
not see shit in the chat room. And they ain't even here. They ain't even here to say free Keno. CJ Ass ain't
hey,
here. He's here though.
what happened
Uh
though?
he showed up on time. Look at him. What's up, cousin Ro? What up, Trey? What up,
He said I showed
DD?
up one time.
See you one time. We got
Right.
we got Chris from Inbox 3D. Look
Wherever
at you,
somewhere
man.
my people at.
Hey, shout out to Chris, man. We appreciate you.
What
If
up,
you're looking
DD?
for 3D printed goods for your
Yeah, we up in here.
chondros, he's got all types of things. Go hit up Chris from Inbox 3D. We're gonna show his video real quick.
For real. For real. Then we got ring. Let's see a ring off, man. I can't hear you. Stay right here. Get right back.
All I heard was you yelling at your son. How y'all been? It's been a minute. It seems like it's been a minute, but it was just a week ago. We glad to be back.
Uh-uh.
Who we have on last week again? It's been a long week. I'm sorry, y'all. But anyway, what's up, Adrian?
No, we got Space City.
Yeah, we had Lupe. Shout out to my brother Lupe. It's been a long week. Also, I think it's his wife's birthday, so happy birthday to Mama Lupe.
Happy birthday,
Um,
Mama Lupe.
what else happened? If you know Chuck Vogel, man, whisper a prayer for him. He was supposed to be here a while ago. Um, you know, once we get up there in age, we have things happen to us, and sometimes it takes them a while to figure out what it is. But we love Chuck, and we wish he was here with us, being entertaining as fuck. But whisper a prayer for Chuck. There was something else I was supposed to say, but I'm probably not gonna remember it till about 45 minutes from now. Yeah, you got anything, Kino? Oh
No,
yeah,
man. Wanted to say congratulations to the Ravens, man. They won.
yeah.
Cash,
I was
cash
about to.
off my damn ring. I gotta find it. But with Khalil, I'll show y'all Khalil. This Khalil. This is a state champion ring.
Hey, that's a good looking ring.
Yeah, it's a nice looking ring, man. Nice.
Oh, CJ's here now.
So this is a championship ring. Congratulations to them.
CJ brought his ass up in here. What up,
This was all
Salad?
the this was all the late Tuesdays was for.
Yeah, all his 45-minute
Yeah.
late intros.
Yeah.
But he did it. He brought the chip home.
He
We
proved
going to the ship.
was able to
We
prove a lot of
going
people
to the
wrong.
ship.
So congratulations
Listen,
to his team and congratulations to him on getting that job done.
yeah, congrats, little Khalil. He put in a lot of work on season, off season. He did
Yeah.
what he had to do. And Khalil, from what I hear from Keno, little Khalil is shaping up to be a pretty good leader on the field. So, he's growing to be like his dad. It just seems like he probably has better people skills than his father.
Wow. I have amazing people skills. You know what I'm saying? I just got a low tolerance for bullshit. That's all.
That's what you call it.
Well, my people skills are amazing. You know what I'm saying? I reach the people. You know what I'm saying?
Who said that? Speaking of chip, are y'all gonna do another hot chip challenge? It could happen. It could happen. Um, It probably shouldn't happen, but I'll be realistic with y'all. It really could happen. It could happen.
Who asked that?
Not Tuck.
Come on, I knew that Tucker asking dumb shit like that. Yeah, I see it.
Also, we got Chondro
Thank y'all. Thank
Classifieds.
y'all. We appreciate it.
So shout out to Mikey Marsh. He's got some animals. Here's one. Talk to Mikey Marsh. Here's
Yeah.
another. And another. So if you're looking to get a new Neo around Christmas time for yourself, instead of doing the right thing and buying your kids Christmas presents, go spend that money with Mikey Marsh, man.
Those are sarong artifacts crossed with Cyclops.
Yeah, Kino's seen them. Um,
Yeah, I seen them
but
all in
yeah,
person.
but yeah.
They are very
Um,
nice.
I expected Mikey Marsh to do great things. We had we had some conversations about some things before, and you know,
Yeah.
shout out to Mikey Marsh. Tuck said, "Do it for U.S. Art. We're not gonna make any money. Like nobody's gonna give us any money. To eat that fucking hot chip. We just be up here just saying we're doing something for U.S. Art and not really doing it. That's
True.
pretty much it. We just eat a hot ass chip for y'all's amusement because it's not really for ours. I'm actually kind of concerned too because I really thought Keno almost died last time. Yo, Keno got hella pale and sickly, like, and then he drank water. He was almost better. It was like he found out he had the disease, and then he got the same doctor as Magic Johnson. It was real quick, and he was all right. Um, it's probably something that's probably not a good thing to say out loud, but it's too late.
I had that. I had some of that meat in rock from Meat Man.
Did you smoke it?
Put it on my hand. Well, all that good.
We got we're gonna do an MVF deep dive today. This is the question. Um, and the question is, as soon as this fucking mouse works, is raise your hand if you have bought uh, a farm bred animal that you suspect is a wild caught animal. Um, and that's pretty much the question. There's somebody who said that they have a few Bushmaster animals, one of which uh, is one of the nicest yellow Beox they've ever seen. um, there's some other things on here. Hold on one second. My computer decided to refresh itself real quick. Yeah, we've all done this. Um, So the original question was just see how many people work with these animals and see what your experience are, your reasons to keep or not to keep it. I have always heard USCB, but I can't help but think about the fact that Rico Walter and Trooper Walsh worked with a significant number of farm bred wild caught animals, as it was as the potential to find something unique. So let's be honest. A lot of people they have negative things to say about wild caught animals or farm bred animals, but truly and honestly, that's where most people's stock came from. There were as time went on, yeah, people they did start breeding things, and this is before they really had localities for the animals too. So for a while, they were just wild caught, whatever. And then there came a point. Where the hell did Keno go? Is he coming back? Anyway, um, so for a while they were just designers or outcrosses that weren't really called outcrosses, but when it comes to people buying imports and things like that, there's a lot of people that are still buying imports that are not telling you the truth about it. Or they're telling you to buy captive bred animals and they do buy imports. If you talk to a lot of the bigger, like, because I know two people that are importers, they will tell you uh, they will tell you that they sell snakes to people that won't admit that they're getting these animals. And I have a lot of imports. I don't even know how many at this point, but um, these animals are generally healthy, man. I would say that there is a portion of time that you will spend getting them together. Also, at the same time, with that portion of time, the animal that you get once it comes in as an import is not going to be how it looks, 6 months from now. 6 months from now, that animal is going to look a lot different, more robust. The color is going to be a little bit better. So, a lot of these imports, they're kind of diamonds and rough. Um, but back to the original question, I think it's kind of hard to like buy an import animal and not know it's an import animal. Maybe it's because I've seen so many of them, um, and I've seen so many, captive bred animals that there's a lot of tales about an import animal, scarring, you know, things like that. A lot of times you see with imports like they're missing their lure. Uh, you'll see like the little nematodes that get embedded in their skin and things like that. Um, and that's just in like the ones that actually can be saved. A lot of the imports, they don't make it. Most of them actually don't make it very long. But it's hard to tell. It's hard to not be able to see the difference between a captive bred animal and an import. And we're not talking about the difference between designers and a roof. They're just the animals are going to look very different. It doesn't always
Shout out to
die in
them.
6 months.
Shout out to them farm bred animals and the wild caught animals, man.
Yeah, we love them.
A lot of these lines, all these damn lines wouldn't even be here without them.
No. You got anything to add to that, Kino?
Um, no, I like what you were saying. I heard you. I was just, I had a malfunction. We'll talk about it after the show. Remember how I told you I was feeling before the show?
Yeah.
You had a malfunction, but no, I feel you on. I feel you
That's
on
funny.
that. On a lot of people, not telling the truth about the animals that they get. It's like if you really pay attention to the snake stuff, it's like right there in plain sight, right in front
Yeah.
of you.
Like Flavor Flav said back in the day, don't believe the hype, man. A lot of these guys, they might tell you only buy a captive bred snake, but they themselves will buy some imports. And you need imports at a certain point in time in your collection to introduce new blood. Uh,
Yeah,
you do.
for
And
sure.
that's
Ain't
that's
nothing
that's
wrong with
my
that.
opinion.
Just be honest about it. That's all.
Yeah. But that's enough about the topic. Y'all ready to talk to Dr. Warren Booth? All right, let's go bring him in. Hey, welcome to the stage, Dr. Booth.
How's it
Shout out
going,
to the
guys?
doctor.
Good, how you
Thanks for joining
doing?
us tonight.
Good. Just drop the doctor. Just call me Warren.
Okay, we'll call you
I do
Warren.
prefer that.
All right.
Hey, we appreciate you for coming through. Uh we know that you're probably a really busy guy. Um
Yeah.
and I promise you that we'll have a good, clean show. We will try not to talk about midgets. We will try real hard. But anyway,
Somebody
for
always bring him up on the show. It's never me. It's never me, one.
it's usually you. Uh,
No, no, I just
get it.
expound on them, but I never bring it up.
Thank God you're not a midget doctor. Uh, uh, Ward, could you give us a little bit of your background and where you're from? Tell us a little bit about Ireland.
Yeah, I'm from Belfast, Northern Ireland. I lived there until I was 26, and then I moved to the US. So I've been in the US just about 20 years. So I did my degree and my PhD in genetics and evolutionary genetics back in Belfast, and in 2006, 2005, I moved to the US. First to NC State. I worked at NC State in Raleigh, North Carolina for 6.5 years. Then I moved to Oklahoma, to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I was a professor for 11 years. And then 2 years ago, I moved to Virginia Tech here in Blacksburg, Virginia. Bit about Ireland. It's great. It's green. I'm glad I don't live there anymore. But it was certainly fun now to go back as a tourist. For the first couple of years that I left, I had no real interest in going back. And we don't plan to move back. My wife and I are both from Belfast, but we just got our US citizenship on Friday. So we have no desire to move back to Belfast or to Ireland, but still a great place to visit. But I've been keeping snakes for about 30 years. So I had snakes back in Ireland.
How was it growing up there, like as a kid?
And congratulations on your citizenship. That's a long road,
man. Yeah, it growing up was difficult in a way. So Belfast is renowned for the troubles that went on in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. It was a sectarian kind of divide. It was Protestant against Catholic, and there was people getting murdered every night. I'm from a Protestant background, but I'm an atheist. My wife's from a Catholic background, so having two kind of mixed religion kind of people coming together when they're 15, 16-year-old wasn't a good thing. In fact, a friend of mine who was 16 was doing the same thing, and he was murdered for doing that at 16 years old. So it wasn't pleasant. It's totally different now. Northern Ireland's a great place now, but back in the 80s and 90s, it was pretty hairy at times. But you got on with it. It's just you grew up. It's what you were used to. So you knew there was areas you couldn't go into or shouldn't go into.
Oh wow! So not to dig too much into your marriage, but how is that like you've been an atheist and she's been an active Catholic?
No, it's fine. There's no real issues. It's always been that way.
Okay, so it's never really like you guys can separate it, and like she goes to her separate church as well.
She'll do that with our kids, because our kids are raised Catholic, and I decided they can make their own decision when they're old enough.
Yeah. Right.
We don't force it on them, but I'll go with her at Christmas or Easter. She'll drag me along with her. But what am I going to do? I don't believe in God. I'm not suddenly going to turn around and believe. But I don't have any issues with people that do. So it's not as if I'm against religion. It's just I choose not to follow a religion.
Yeah.
I only have one question about Catholic Church because I've never been to a Catholic church.
It's all standing up and sitting down every 5 minutes.
But do you guys have food in the back? Like after church services, Catholic churches.
I don't know, so because I never go, but when my kids leave, they'll go like once or twice a month, but they always seem to arrive home with a donut in their hand, and they didn't go to the donut store, so I think they get them at the church, but I don't know. Yeah,
I think that's a difference. I think that if you go to a Southern Baptist church, you get a plate of peach cobbler.
Oh, well,
at least get a plate of peach cobbler. Right. That's probably the difference.
Maybe I'm in the wrong religion.
Caramel cake. Yeah, caramel cake that's gonna definitely put you in a coma.
Oh my God! Yeah.
My mom makes caramel cakes. She still makes them from scratch, and I just look at them, and my teeth start hurting. I just stop looking at them.
That is one thing that's different about Ireland to the US. In the US, there's sugar in everything. There's sugar in bread. There's sugar in, and it's a bit much at times.
It's weird.
Diabetes.
Listen, we all say it's weird. We don't know who doesn't think it's weird.
Yeah.
Most of us just
sweet tea.
Do you have to put sugar in everything?
Yeah. Yeah. I still don't understand sweet tea and stuff like that. But I never will.
The thing about sweet tea is that you're never really gonna understand sweet tea in America because nobody measures the sugar in sweet tea. Nobody, like even when they have like bottles of sweet tea and I see it, like I don't really trust it. I don't trust what they got to say about the sugar in sweet tea. Am I crazy?
No, I think you're right.
No.
I tasted it a couple of times, and you felt like the eyeball twitch a little bit, and you get tremors. Yeah,
your face starts hurting.
Yeah,
I can't drink that sugary shit no more.
No.
And my mom was asking me what type of fudge I want for Christmas a few days ago, and I was getting happy, and I was just
she makes fudge.
Yeah.
Wow.
You want to hear a funny story? When I was in basic training back in 2009, my mom sent me a letter saying, "I know that you're in training, but I'm gonna send you some fudge and cookies." Meanwhile, I'm in basic training. I wrote her a letter and sent it back to her immediately saying, "Don't send that shit here. You're gonna get me fucked up." Uh, and it got there.
Wow.
And my drill sergeant, he opened the box. He was like, "This box sounds kind of heavy." And he goes through it and he starts eating the shit. And then he tells me, he's just like, "I'll give everybody here a little piece of something if you lick the grease off my finger." And I said, because I was at this point in time, I was 21 years old. I was a child. I said, "If you lick something else." It didn't go well. They fucked me up. And I had to put on all my gear, full battle rattle, and go in the sand pit and dig my way to China.
Okay.
I was literally digging a hole for hours. So that's my Christmas fudge story. But
Wow.
that's not what we're here to talk about.
No,
Yeah,
no.
the army is ridiculous sometimes. But I will say this. I think that there's been a lot of movies about the like some of the stuff that was going on in Northern Ireland. I know the bombing. It's really
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah.
I do have a question for you though about that. Like, did Brexit actually affect Ireland at all?
Yeah. Yeah. Very much so. Yeah. It affects Northern Ireland in many different ways. You know, it cuts off supply chains between the mainland Europe and the UK and Ireland. There isn't a border between Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, and Southern Ireland, which is Ireland. There's no hard border, but I think there's still some issues with moving things between kind of Southern Ireland and Northern Ireland. So I think there are problems. You know, for people traveling, it creates issues. You know, where if you're traveling on a British passport, you might need to get a visa to travel into some countries in Europe, I believe. With an Irish passport, you don't. So we're lucky in that my wife and I and my kids are tri-citizens. So now for us, my wife and I, it's the US, but also Ireland. Our Irish passport covers Europe, and our British passport covers Northern Ireland, Great Britain. So kind of we can go anywhere without kind of issues for visas. But Brexit did cause problems, and I was in London 2 weeks ago with a friend. A friend of mine plays in a pretty big band in the UK, and they have had trouble moving their gear between Europe and the UK whenever it comes to tours because certain things are not licensed to go across borders and so on. So it creates issues. It's kind of funny whenever I read some of the stories about Brexit. And one of the big issues, for example, there were florist companies, flower arrangers that would buy their flowers from Europe and bring them into England every day. Well, that's all changed. That's all cut off. You can't do that. And these are people that voted for Brexit, and yet they screwed up their own business because of it. So yeah, I think it's a mess. It should never have happened, and hopefully one day it'll get reverted.
I remember when it happened, and I didn't really understand at the time when it happened, like why necessarily happened. But one person did tell me this, and he is from England. Uh, he told me that in a lot of occasions, the same thing that happens in America happens in the UK. I couldn't really understand like that was his reason for it, but maybe just maybe that's behind it. But I do want to get to this. So what was it like keeping snakes in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, it's very different. It's totally different than what it is here. In that at the time, you're getting animals. You were generally buying them from there was a reptile store in Belfast that was really good. It was run by a guy called Victor Carruthers. It was called City Reptiles, right in the city center of Belfast. It had been there for I think it was opened in the 80s or early 90s, and it had been there for a long time. And he got a lot of really cool things in. But being a reptile store, they're expensive because it's a brick and mortar shop. They got to add their prices to it. But if you saw something different and you wanted to get it, the only way you could get it was to travel over to the United Kingdom to get it. At this point, importing yourself from the US really wasn't something you could do easily. So, for example, if we wanted to get emerald tree boas or Amazon tree boas, we would get a ferry from Belfast to Liverpool and then drive from Liverpool to London and meet a friend of ours who imported animals from Suriname and Guyana. We'd buy what we wanted and then we'd do the trip back again the next day.
bro. What up, everybody?
You know, there's no FedEx. You couldn't ship. Well, there is FedEx, but you can't ship reptiles through it. So you can't turn around in Belfast and buy an animal from London and have it shipped over. So you lose all that. And the other option then is to go over to Europe to one of the big shows like Ham or Houghton. But that adds a lot of cost to it and a lot of time to it. So it makes keeping very different. It's all changed now, right? Importing's changed. Before I moved to the US, I imported some ball pythons. Stupidly at the time, I don't do ball pythons anymore. But I imported ball pythons from the US. And at the time, they didn't have master CITES lists where importers and exporters could get stuff to you basically a week or two later. It took 6 to 9 months to get CITES export paperwork for ball pythons to go from Florida to Ireland, which was kind of crazy. So it was difficult to get diversity of animals. You know, like I remember whenever Bob Clark had the albino ball pythons, I wanted to get them, too difficult to get, so I didn't bother. You'd see animals kind of trickling in here and there, but it wasn't to the same extent, you know, of what's available in the US. But then again, what you do also find is you sometimes find a higher diversity of animals because you get a lot of what's coming through Europe, and there tends to be a lot more diversity in kind of the species that are available. So you find those kind of coming into the UK and Ireland. But a totally different hobby than it is here. You know, FedEx, the ability to ship animals overnight changes the way we keep and what we keep. And whenever you don't have that, it puts a lot more effort into how you go about getting those animals.
I mean, that's interesting. I also want to know, like, how'd you guys get equipment, like caging and thermostats and heating?
So
like
thermostats, there's companies that sold stuff. I think Microclimatize was one of the companies, and we would buy their stuff. With cages, we actually had a really good friend of ours. I worked in the reptile store for a bit, and he was a glazier, and he came in and he actually built cages for us. So he would build me for my arboreal snakes. He would build me these 2 foot by 2 foot by 18-inch wide, or 2 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot square enclosures that are glass, sliding doors. He would cut a hole in the top that I would then mesh off and put a ceramic heating element above it. And he would cut holes in the sides where I could put access tubes to go in between different cages so that I didn't have to take animals out. I could just open up caps and they would move in between the different cages. So he built all those for me. And at the time, he built them for me for, this is maybe 25 years ago, but he built them for me for like the equivalent of about $50 each, which was peanuts. You couldn't even get, you know, stuff like that today for anything less than $400 or $500.
Nah,
so that was fine. And then we built all our own racks. You know, it's all, you know, melamine and Rubbermaid type containers. You know, we built all our own stuff, and we used heat tape. We can still get heat tape or heat rope kind of stuff, you know, but it was certainly not, you didn't have Freedom Breeder racks or ARS or, you know, PVC cages and stuff like that at that point. Yeah. And then I bought all of my rodents from the university. So I was lucky in the university that I was in, they had an animal breeding facility to produce animals for scientific research. And they sold me all of their surplus every week. So I would buy, it didn't matter whether it had to be a weaned rat or mouse. It was all frozen through to an adult, and they were 25 cents a piece. And I bought everything they had every week, and then I sold the excess and kept what I needed. So
Awesome.
it's a pretty good deal. I wish I could still get that now.
Yeah, I wish I could get that deal now.
For 25 cents for a small rack, man, look.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Also, you know, I think that probably part of the big jump is like COVID. Like we experienced like a big jump in prices.
Oh, I've seen that there,
smaller rodents after COVID, and I'm always interested to like try to hear like what happened everywhere else besides America. Did they have the same thing? I know you wouldn't know because you weren't there.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to talk to some friends, but I think most places did. It was all supply chain issues, right? It was all, you know, they simply couldn't get what they need for raising, whether it's bedding or whether it's food or whether it's people to work for them. And then everything just starts to add up. The problem is that a lot of that stuff is not available, yet the prices don't seem to be coming down. They just go up again. And I suppose that relates to inflation. But yeah, it's not fun. Whenever I put in my rodent order every month or two, it kind of it makes my anus pucker a wee bit, you know, whenever
makes you kind of sad.
Yeah.
You start
makes me question how many animals I've got and whether I need them all.
Yeah. You know, I realize I'm an old man when I get mad about prices of things. Like 5 years ago, this was this much money. I'm just sitting there by myself having my own fit. But it's not cheap.
Hey, ain't nothing wrong with that, man.
What you mean?
It'd be like that
You know,
sometimes you get reminisce on the good days.
yeah. I do have a couple
Good old
of
days.
people nearby here that I buy from, and they're certainly cheaper than buying them from different companies. But I used to get wholesale from one of the major companies here, and even the pricing of the wholesale I can get cheaper from a friend locally. And it's kind of crazy. It actually has made me question kind of the animals that I keep and whether I should cut down on certain lines and stuff like that there, because I got about 120, 140 animals, and that adds up whenever it comes to feeding.
Do you keep them all in the same building?
All in my basement.
Oh.
Yeah, so I've got maybe 40 or 50 Corrales tree boas. I've got some Eastern Sanzinia, the green Sanzinia, and then
I saw your Woma.
I've got womas. Yeah, I've got womas. I got Darwin carpets, Dunn's pythons, spotted pythons, children's pythons, and I got a whole bunch of those. We've got the albino children's and the patternless children's and stuff like that there. Caramel, albino, Sumatran shorttails, Brazilian rainbow boas, Colombian rainbow boas. And for those, I got like the T negatives, the T positives, the hypomelanistics, the patternless, the leucistics, and the anorthristics. And then I've got a bunch of boas. So I've got kind of Mexican boas and then Costa Rican T positive boas that I've got a whole kind of group of. So, and then I've got some leopard geckos and I've got some tortoises and too many things. But the problem is that every year I breed them, I'm kind of like, oh, well, I got to hold that one back and I got to hold this one back. And then maybe I need to hold these 4 back or that entire litter back. And I think that needs to change. I think this year I only decided to keep 2 animals from what I bred out of the 100 or so that were born.
Yeah, that seems to be the problem. But sometimes you just gotta look at your collection and you just gotta say, well, it makes me happy.
That's exactly right. And it does, right? It's not something, my wife has no interest in it. She never even goes into the room that they're in. But if it helps pay for a vacation, then she loves it.
Oh, yeah.
But I go into my reptile room whenever my wife and kids have gone to bed, and that's when I'll stick on a podcast or whatever, and I'll listen to that while I'm cleaning and feeding. And it keeps me happy. The day that it doesn't,
kids you got?
things will go. I got 2. I got a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old.
Wow.
And my 7-year-old
much older.
My 7-year-old. Well, my wife and I, we decided, we've been together for about 30 years. She was 15, I was 16, 17 whenever we met. And we just decided, let's wait until we finish school. Let's wait until we finish college. Let's wait until we finish PhD. Let's wait until, and that dragged on. And finally, I was like late 30s and I thought, yes, by the time we need to have kids if we're going to do it. But my kids are great. My son he's really into leopard geckos. So we just got him a group of leopard geckos. I'm being a good parent. He wanted a leopard gecko and I told him no, but he could have a pair of leopard geckos. And that pair turned into a male and 3 females that were pretty expensive. So he's immersed in his little leopard gecko group now, which is fun.
I showed my daughter a picture of a sugar glider.
Oh God, no. Mammals, man. Mammals are too hard to keep. The only mammals I like are the frozen ones in the freezer to feed the snakes. Mammals are a lot of work.
She saw it and she was just like, what's that? And I was just like, oh, it's a sugar glider. She was just like, can you have one in the cage in the house? And I was just like, your mom not gonna allow it.
But just think the problem that mammals have, like, I love dogs. We don't have dogs anymore ever since I passed away last year, right? But it's the case of if you want to go on vacation for 2 weeks, if you got a bunch of snakes or geckos, you can do that, right? But if you've got a dog and a cat and whatever, you got to put them into boarding or get someone to look after them, and it costs a ton more. Like I remember with our 2 dogs, it would cost about $2,000 for us to put them into kennels for 2 weeks while we went vacation. And I'm thinking, screw that. I'm in the kind of the mammal free zone at the moment. So the snakes are easy. But yeah.
Yeah, I got 2 dogs. I got a bunch of snakes, but every time like we gotta leave, like I'm not really worried about the snakes. I prep snakes to leave essentially. Like I'm leaving, and that's easy. Just give them all fresh water that day. Make sure the enclosure's clean. Make sure that they had a meal recently if they needed one. But for the most part, like I don't worry about them. It's some damn dogs.
Yeah,
it's the dogs.
Yeah,
dogs.
I love them, but
Dogs
it's just,
are a pain in the ass.
I love them. Had them all my life. But it's just a lot of work.
What are you saying, Warren?
I said I've had dogs all my life. I grew up in a family that kept and bred dogs, but
Yeah, we did
I'm,
too.
I'm at that point of my life where I'm just kind of like we're taking a break for a while. You know, I like to travel, so it's
We didn't. I was about to say we didn't go on many vacations when I was a kid though. So now it's like having to find a damn dog sitter.
yeah, costs money.
Man, I'm so glad we don't have Aliyahs no more. Then I had a dog that kept breaking his leg,
I remember that. Keto was upset.
and he charged me that. He cost me like $6,000 though.
Holy crap!
But he
Yeah,
was a good looking dog though.
I had one that kept popping its kneecap out, and they were like they were looking, I think, 4,000 for surgery, and I thought, his kneecap is fine. It'll pop out. It pops back in again, you know. So
People have become so compassionate to like animals that I feel like animals are gonna become like the next version of like humans, where they're just gonna be like nursing homes for dogs. like at some point in time,
Probably.
it's
you
just-
know, the problem is they're so lovable. Dogs are great, and
Yeah.
The reason we don't have them now is not just the travel. Is I get very attached to them, and whenever they go, then it's pretty tough, you know. So I'm a sensitive soul when it comes to that. So we just thought take a break for a bit, you know. Whenever we come in the travel, then we'll do stuff again.
Yeah, I got two dogs. They're both pains in the ass. Yeah. And when I was leaving the gym today, it was people at the ASPCA. They were outside the gym. I thought they were like trainers or something. I was like, what the fuck is this? And they were just like, oh, we're trying to get people to like volunteer and donate money to the ASPCA. I was just like, yeah, find somebody else. Because, you know, I remember growing up and seeing those ASPCA commercials on the wings of an angel. And I don't think that they spent all that money on them dogs that like had rebar sticking out of them in the commercial.
No, just donate to your local animal shelter in the form of food and toys and stuff like that. That's a better way to do it. Yeah.
All those dogs are like Vietnam vets that just got eye patches on and shit. You hear Sarah McLachlan in the background.
That's
On the
true.
wings of an angel. Would you like a dog that has a chunk of his face in this?
Yeah.
Oh man.
They would
That's
always.
crazy.
I think the worst part about those commercials is just like it was always in tandem. Like you would see
You're
that
like,
commercial and like the Girls Gone Wild commercial, or you would see like the Girls Gone Wild commercial and the ASPCA commercial. And every once in a while, because it's back in the day, you would see like ASPCA commercial and like phone sex hotline commercial. It's just like y'all don't really care about these dogs.
Nah,
do you?
you capping. That's
That's true.
Sometimes you will see Ethiopian kid with a whole bunch of flies on his face.
Yeah, but they never listen. They differentiated, bro. And let's be honest, they definitely showed messed up dogs more.
It was
than simply
animal.
Ethiopian.
It was animal, and then Ethiopian kid with the flies.
Yeah,
Animals will always get more money than humans. So,
that's so fucked up.
that's the way it goes.
Ethiopian kid looks at the side. I you see his flies on his face. Like every day, they zoom in on his face. Help a kid.
Yeah, if you
I
don't
don't
give
wanna know
us money, we can't give them oatmeal anymore.
I don't know what time of night you were watching these here to get Girls Gone Wild and Ethiopian kids and dogs, but you know it's probably a bit late in the evening, right?
Yeah, listen. Back in the day, me and Keno were not doing the right things with our televisions, and they used to have this television show on BET called BET Uncut, and they would show these rap videos, like the uncut version of it, or they would show videos that they weren't really ever going to show on TV, and that's what we were. That's what we were up late doing. We were watching those videos. We were being little.
You see it, Warren. Just remember, if you see a tip drill, point it out.
Listen, don't go look up that video.
Go watch tip drill on YouTube. Warren. Check it out.
Definitely not.
Check it out. DM me. It's only like 2 minutes. It's a rap video.
Nah, the tip drill video is like 6 minutes, bro. You know, a video was short was a I ain't got no panties on video. That one was short.
No, you don't need to see that one. But see the tip drill video, and then DM me and be like, hey, we'll talk about it.
Anyway, I gotta ask you
Anyway,
this
back
question.
to animals quickly. I will tell you this that I had a decent group of animals in Northern Ireland, and when I was finishing my PhD, I sold a lot of the tree boas and I
It
sold
was,
stuff.
wasn't it, Trey?
I imported or exported about 15 or 16 snakes from Ireland to the US. The ones that I've been working with, and that kind of started the group here. So I went through the process of that, which was not easy and fairly stressful at the time, but yeah.
That's what I was gonna ask you.
How?
So,
Yeah.
did you import any of the animals from like when you moved? And like, what was the process like? Did you have to do CITES paperwork for all
Yeah.
of them?
Yeah. So there were 15 boas and one ball python. And I got CITES export paper. I was working in two different ways. I was going to the UK and I was going through Ireland to see which one worked first and fastest. And the Irish ones came through within a day. Basically, I applied for CITES paperwork with Ireland, and a day or two later, it came through. And what I then did, I packaged everything up in a styrofoam box, and then you'd lined that with cardboard, so it was a box inside a box, basically. Hand warmers, and then that flew from Dublin to Philadelphia. And a friend of mine picked them up in Philadelphia, but it wasn't as straightforward as that because they landed in Philadelphia. And my friend was going. This was in November. I wasn't moving until January. But my friend was picking them up, and he was going to take them to his place and look after them for a couple of months until I got established in North Carolina. They left Dublin, I think about 7 a.m. I dropped them off. They flew over. My friend went to Philadelphia to pick them up, and they weren't there. And then they said, well, there's another flight coming in 2 hours' time. They might be on that. He went 2 hours later. They weren't on that one either. And then he went back 2 hours later for the third flight, and there was not on that. Now, this is November in Philadelphia, so it's not warm.
It's definitely cold.
Yeah, and this is about 30,000, maybe 40,000 pounds worth of snakes, right? Maybe $40,000 worth of snakes for what they were. And so I'm, at this point in time, I just thought, it's not as if I could like text them and stuff like that. There, I had to phone from Northern Ireland to Philadelphia on the typical, expensive, calls. And finally, the next day, he called me up and said, look, we got them. And I'm expecting him to tell me they're all frozen. But it turned out that they arrived in on the first flight. And the person that scanned them recognized they were reptiles, and he put them into a warm room and didn't put a note that they put them into this warm room to keep them safe. So every time they came through, they didn't think they were there. So finally they found them and we got them and everything was fine. So that was a day of stress thinking I'd spent money shipping animals over and lost them all. But my friend picked them up and looked after them for me for 2 or 3 months. And then by the time I moved over and built some enclosures, then I went up and got them from him. And that formed the basis of a lot of the animals that I have now, because they're ones today there. I've got the subsequent generations from breeding those, or else I bred them and traded them for different things over time.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand how that happened. How they would move it. I used to work at the FedEx World Hub in Memphis, and like when reptiles would come through, there was all types of different things that would happen to them. Like none of them, just because people would get weird about a box with a reptile in it. They would move them. They would put them in weird places. All types of things. We would have chickens get loose all the time.
Like I will say this, like I've shipped
geckos get loose all the time, and nose crickets.
Debo's chicken coop.
Yeah, I've shipped hundreds. I've shipped hundreds of snakes in the US over the last 20 years, probably a couple of thousand, and I've only ever had 2 that have gone missing in Memphis, and they were found later on that day and shipped the next day. And I've only ever had one animal that died in shipping. So I know that people complain about FedEx, but I can't really complain about them. It's worked out really well for me, and without them, then there's no other way of me getting animals to any other states or other than a local sales, and that's not going to cover what I produce.
Well, I'm gonna be honest with you, Warren. As a person that worked there for over a year, I'm gonna let you know, we trying to do everything at FedEx except work. We trying to drink on the job. Is people putting other substances into their job? We trying to use it. We was trying to use it as people was dating. They was people was trying to figure out where they could get something. It was always some other shit there besides work. There's people that had worked at the World Hub and FedEx, because I remember this. There were people that had been there for like 20 years. They never got promoted because they just kept them there because they did the least. They did work, even though it was
Hey,
some bottom of the barrel work. They
as
still
long as
kept
they
them.
got my snake from point A to point B, I'm happy with that there, you know?
We lost a lot of geckos on our line. I worked at Jacksonville line. We lost a lot of geckos. I'm
Okay.
just going to put it to you. No, never any snakes, but Jacksonville, we lost a lot of geckos and a
Wow.
lot of crickets.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
it
thankfully
was
that hasn't. I was going to say touch wood, but there's no. Well, there's a base there. But yeah, I'm glad that this hasn't happened to me.
yeah, it's always a wonderful thing to not have to lose an expensive animal
Yeah.
because the person that's moving the package is high. Um, but I also want to ask you about the snakes. Is like, how did you adjust your keeping? Uh, how did you adjust your keeping from how you kept them in Ireland to how you kept them in the U.S.?
Not much. So all of the arboreal stuff, I changed the type of heating system that we used. So for the arboreal stuff, I use ceramic heating elements, and they would have a guard over them and stuff like that there. Whereas here, everything was heat tape or I use radiant heat panels on all of my arboreal stuff. So that's really the only difference. You know, the temperatures are always about the same. You know, I keep everything about the same temperature, roughly. You know, everything sits at about a 82 to 84 ambient with a hot spot. You know, they'll get them if they want to. They can get into the kind of the low 90s. They got a cool end into the late high 70s. But everything, whether it's boas or tree boas, Sanzinia, everything is kept the same. You know, I don't change things around a lot. You know, so it's very straightforward. You know, the nice thing here is that we've got some really nice thermostats available now. You know, I used to use the Vivarium electronic stuff from Reptile Basics, but I switched over a couple of years ago to the Herpstats, and I really like the Herpstat 4 and Herpstat 6 kind of systems. They're pretty informative. So I think just as time has gone past, we've kind of evolved in the systems that we use, and they're a bit more better and a bit more controllable. You know, programmable.
That is true. As time has gone on, I stopped buying V's as well. I know some people they still like them, but you know, generally, just speaking, like the herb stats to me are just better. At least that's just my opinion of it now.
Yeah, you can see when they're running and stuff like that there, and to what percentage they're running. But and I like the fact that they'll control the light system as well. You know, so if I've got a V6 and I can put 4 or 5 of the things on the heaters and then one on the lights to run everything, which I kind of like. But I still have all my V stats. They're all sitting on the shelf, so just in case if something crapped out on me, you know, I've got a backup. But I think they're good systems. I just think the herb stats are kind of a little bit more advanced in the whole process, you know.
Yeah, I do like the Wi-Fi ones that everybody says suck. I do like them.
So I've got them, but I've never set up the Wi-Fi part of it.
You never set up the Wi-Fi part of it? It's actually
No.
is that everybody tells me just like, well, how do you set it up? I'm just
It's
like,
just a bit clunky, you know. You got to click through it and then kind of typing in your password, and it just seems a bit clunky for what it is. If they had an app, a phone app, and connected to it, that would be a better way to do it.
It is. It's like using a computer from like 1997.
Yeah.
There's no app though, and I think that's what bothers people. But realistically, like once you get it set up, because it doesn't really take long to set it up anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But once you get it set up, you know, it's kind of cool to like know like how your thermostat is actually functioning, especially in terms of an incubator.
Yeah.
And just seeing how that works. And you can watch it a little bit too hard and lose your shit, but it is cool to see it. It is cool to see it. I actually enjoy it, but I will say this: you are right. The fact that they don't have an app, it does suck. It does.
Yeah, because I think if they had that, it would be a lot more accessible, you know. And I'd use it. I definitely would. But I think if they did also, I would be on it all the time, kind of checking this and adjusting that. And the best thing that I've ever done is I set something and I leave it alone. Like when it's a bit different now living in the house here in Virginia because it's an ultra high spec house with ultra high tech controls for heating, so it never gets cold, which makes it a problem if I want to get the animals down to the lower temperatures. It makes a bit of an issue there. But in Oklahoma, my snakes were all in the basement there. The house was 100 years old. The house was beautiful. It was all ultra modern, but the basement was something like out of the Blair Witch program, right? Blair Witch movies, where it was an unfinished, partially finished basement.
Yeah, you
But
basically live in a house that survived the Dust Bowl, though.
Would you do?
Yeah, right.
Heat?
Well, that's it. And it dropped down into the 60s. In the winter, it dropped into the 60s. And I would just leave my all my enclosures were kept at the exact same temperatures throughout the year. They had a hot spot, they had an ambient, and you would just see what would happen is that the areas away from the heating elements would get colder as the room got colder, and the snakes would actually self-adjust. So you'll see the boas all moving from the ambient. Normally in the spring and summer, they'd move to the cool end and they'd stay at like 72 and just sit there for 3 months, 4 months. Now it's a bit more difficult. I have to work out how to adjust some temperatures. I bred animals here for the first time, dedicated this year, and I was very successful. But there's some things I still want to tweak, and I think the herb stats help with that there because of how programmable they are.
Yeah, I would say that. I think that they are cut above the VEs, and there's still some usage of thermostats that aren't necessarily very good either. But
yeah.
We're not.
So I'm not sponsored by Herbstat, but if Herbstat want to sponsor me, I'd love to have a couple of more Herbstats. So, yeah.
Listen, we do know a person that we'll call Herbstat and tell them what they think about the actual thermostats. But I gotta ask you, I want to talk about your science background. And I want to get into that. Could you go just a little bit into the things that you have worked on, and just how you in the future have like once you learn these things, how you applied it to your own collection? And I do want to go over the invasive species things as well.
Yes. So my degree in college was genetics. I got as a kid in high school, I got fascinated by kind of Mendelian inheritance, Mendelian genetics, but I didn't want to work on peas like Gregor Mendel. But so I got into Siamese fighting fish. You had red ones and blue ones, and you could breed them together and see what you got, the different crosses. And for a while, I had hundreds of Siamese fighting fish in a room, all in little jars, around the room, and it just got a nightmare to clean. And at that point, I started seeing reptiles in different color morphs. And I started getting into those because they were an alternative to start playing with genetics, being your own crazy scientist. And that led to doing a degree in genetics. And after the degree, I then went on and did a PhD in evolutionary genetics, and much more at that point interested in how kind of just in kind of population biology and how populations form or go extinct or spread and so on. Finished that, and that led into a position at NC State where I worked on an invasive species, and I worked on indoor urban pest insects, kind of looking at kind of just genetics of spread and invasion and insecticide resistance. And that's kind of stayed with me until now. Like my lab is not a reptile related lab. It's a urban insect evolution lab. But for 10 years, 11 years when I was at Oklahoma, I also played with reptiles a lot. And I did a lot of work on parthenogenesis and snakes. And it was a total accident that I got into that. A friend of mine, Jeff Ronnie, who breeds boas, boaphile, he called me up and said, Warren, I've got a friend who had a litter of boas, doesn't know who the father is. Can you genetically test them to see who the father is? And just before that, I developed molecular markers that could be used to study parentage in snakes, in boa constrictors.
So basically, you took his snakes to the snake version of the Maury show.
Yeah. Yeah, and you got to realize that this is how it felt. Because at this point in time, there was not a lot of academic positions going. There wasn't a lot of professorships available in the US. There was a downturn in the economy. It wasn't good. And I was literally thinking, because I was applying for positions, and then I was getting emails to say that the positions have been canceled and stuff. And I was literally thinking, I was talking to a friend the day before Jeff called me up, and I was like, I think I'm going to end up working in a freaking, paternity test clinic and just saying, you're not the father, getting fairly depressed. And I'm sure people love that, but it was going to depress me. The next day, I get the phone call from Jeff asking me to do this, and I'm like, geez, it's not even a human, it's freaking snakes. Somebody wants to know who the father is with snakes. But we did the testing. I developed these markers for a guy that was working on Hog Island boas on the Cayos Coquinas Islands in Honduras. But I thought, well, I can use them to test parentage. So I did it, and turned out there was no father. There was parthenogenesis. And we wrote that paper up, and it went worldwide in the media. It was crazy. You know, for 2 weeks,
That's
I was just
crazy.
doing interviews for
That's
the
crazy.
BBC, NBC, CBS, Animal Planet, National Geographic, you know, everything. And I thought, well, that's the end of it. You know, this is not a research program of mine, but I just did it to help a friend. And what was weird is that then every couple of weeks I get a phone call or an email from people, you know, I've got a ball python that just laid eggs and there's no male. And we tested those, and we ended up producing all these papers to show all about this parthenogenesis in everything from boa constrictors to king cobras to American crocodiles to, you know, all of these different things. And then I thought, well, I should go a little bit more serious with this. So we started looking into what kind of the mechanisms that drive it and some of the real genomic characteristics. So we spent more time playing with that. And, you know, what's the application? Well, one thing is it tells us that parthenogens are not very successful, right? So if you have a snake that produces parthenogenetically, the babies are not going to do well for you long term. You know, so don't expect to sell them for $1 million, and don't expect to breed them because they generally don't do very well. But they do inform us about the biology of species. They tell us a little bit more about what's happening with populations and what species are capable of. So there's that aspect. So we've worked with the zoos a lot to understand kind of their reproductive systems going on with their captive collections and how they manage their captive collections of snakes, which has been interesting.
So I got a question.
Yeah.
In reptiles, how usually, like, what are the conditions usually for animals to parthogenically, like, reproduce?
Anything. That's
Like,
the weird thing. There, we
I was,
can't seem to find a trigger. There doesn't seem to be anything that stimulates it. And what I believe, I believe it's genetic. There's been work done in fruit flies that has shown that there's been 3 genes, and that if these 3 genes are turned on in specific orders, then they produce parthenogenetically. I believe the same process happens in invertebrates. It doesn't happen in mammals, but it happens in sharks, it happens in birds, it happens in reptiles, both lizards and snakes, and then we now know that it happens in crocodiles. And it's all the same mechanism that they use. But there's got to be an environmental trigger, right? So a lot of with genes being turned on and turned off. So for example, we will all very likely have genes that predispose us to cancer, for example. Doesn't mean you'll ever get cancer. But under the right stimulus, you could get it, right? So you smoke heavily, or you drink heavily, or whatever, then you could get cancer. I believe the same. There's probably an environmental trigger, and we just don't know what it is, about what drives that there to then cause that animal to produce parthenogenetically. But we see lineages of snakes doing it. Like years ago, I remember a friend sent me samples of boas, and it was 2 sisters. There were motley boas, and there were 2 sisters, and both of them were producing parthenogenetically. We have some weird things happening where I've had individuals contact me with ball pythons where they've had a single male bred to 3 unrelated females, and each of those females produce parthenogenetically. So whether there's some other trigger going on, so there's some epigenetic factor, which is kind of interesting. We just don't know what it is yet, you know. And the sad thing is that whenever I worked as a professor in Oklahoma, I could still play around with that and do that work. Here, I got hired into a different position, in the endowed chair position that's got a different expectation for my research, which is the main research that I do. So I can't really sit and play around with, you know, a whole bunch of snakes and do that kind of work, you know. So hopefully somebody will in time.
so you were talking earlier, and what usually, you said that the animals usually produce this way, parthenogenetically. They're usually not healthy. Like, could you tell us a little bit about these animals?
Yeah, so, you know, we see 2 different processes. It's the same mechanism, but 2 different processes with snakes. So up until a couple of years ago, we thought that all snakes had the same sex chromosomes. They thought they were ZW sex chromosomes, where mammals are XY, right? A male mammal is an XY, the female is XX sex chromosomes. In snakes, we thought they were ZW and ZZ, where the males were ZZ and the females were ZW. We did some genomic work, and we found out that boas and pythons actually have XY sex chromosomes as well. So they produce female parthenogens, whereas like things like corn snakes, king cobras, rattlesnakes, they all produce male parthenogens. In those lineages that produce males, they tend to be pretty crappy. They come out deformed. They don't live very long. There's a high level of kind of stillborn and stuff like that there. With the boas and the pythons, they'll produce seemingly healthy offspring that are parthenogens. But over the space of either days or months or a couple of years, they start to decline. So what I noticed, I've got a freezer in my lab that's got about 150 dead parthenogenetic snakes, and they're all around 2 years old. They would get to about 2, and their metabolism just seemed to switch off. They would eat, but they just did not seem to digest food well, and their whole body structure changed, and they just didn't do well at all. I was able to raise a boa and a ball python to adulthood and get them to breed, but those females never survived after that. They never regained weight, and they died like months after giving birth. And when they gave birth, it was to just really abnormal kind of pregnancies. Like 1 egg out of 6 survived, 4 babies out of 9 survived. So it's not a reproductive strategy that we want to try and maintain in the hobby, but it's really common. It's not something that's rare, and you see it a lot. And the reason we know it's so common now is because everybody's breeding color morphs or pattern morphs, and they know what to expect whenever they breed 2 animals together. And the crazy thing is that you can breed animals together, and they can do everything they're meant to, and they can produce a whole litter or clutch of parthenogens, or they can produce some sexually produced babies along with parthenogens. But I think basically don't put any expectation of those doing well. They generally crap out, and they crap out in a crappy way.
So you haven't seen a single animal produce parthenogenetically that you would say was healthy and survived the long haul?
No. We the oldest we raised the boa to was 8, and the ball python was, I think, 7. And what was interesting about the ball python was it produced itself parthenogenetically, so it produced parthenogenetic offspring that then died really quickly. And then I bred that female to a male, and she produced sexually, but only 1 baby out of the 6 eggs hatched, and that baby was fine, but the mother never recovered, never gained weight again, and just started to decline and died within a handful of months.
Yeah.
So it's kind of shitty, and I've always told people if they produce parthenogens, just give them away, or either keep them or give them away, or feed them to your king snake.
Why would you give the animal? Why would you give the animal away?
Well, because there's some people think that they can do well with them, and I think if you're getting it and you're not planning to breed it, you might be able to raise it to 8 or 10 years old, right? It might survive if it's not put through any of the stresses that we put animals through breeding through, right? Through temperature cycling and food cycling and so on. I think if you've got it and you raise it like a sick kid and give it everything it needs, but don't stress it, then it might survive a little bit longer. I'm not saying that it will, but it might.
I'm not even gonna say. I'm not even gonna say that. But when it comes to these animals, you said that none of them did well. They kind of all later on kind of became deformed. How did that happen? Was it just body composition, or their bodies just broke down?
I think it's part of it. Yeah, I think they stopped metabolizing food in the way that they should, and their body structures kind of changed. They went from kind of their body shape to their spine protruding quite a bit. You would see fusion or breakage of vertebra in their necks and their spines, and it was just pretty miserable. No, it doesn't happen to all of them. I know of some blood pythons and reticulated pythons that are parthenogens that have done okay, but they've also not been put through any of the stresses of breeding, or any of the kind of the natural stresses that we would put them through. So they just don't do well, and it sucks because it's a really interesting thing, but it just sucks that we can't kind of progress them further.
Yeah, I mean, it does suck, but it is very interesting to see. I've only heard of these animals. I haven't exactly seen one. Pat said he had a Partho GTP clutch, and none of them survived.
Yeah.
We had something else. Chris from Inbox, he had the question. He said, "Is it more common in boas over pythons and other species?"
No, we see them. We see it distributed across them all. It's we see a lot of ball python clutches because there's a lot of people keeping ball pythons. We see a decent number of boas because there's a decent number of people keeping boas and breeding boas. So we're less likely to see it in tree boas or tree pythons just because there's not as many people breeding them. If there were, I think we'd see it at the exact same rate. It's not uncommon. It used to be considered this really rare thing, but it's not uncommon at all. It's kind of crazy how frequently we see it. But I think that ties into the whole fact that it's likely to be tied to a couple of genes. And because we inbreed the shit out of all of our animals, you're increasing the likelihood of those genes being present in a lot of the population. And therefore, you're increasing the likelihood of seeing it.
So you think it's more common in animals in captivity that have been inbred over years, more so than animals in the wild?
Yeah. So we find it in the wild populations. We find it in about 2%, 2 to 4% of females have produced parthenogenetically in the litters or the clutches that we look at in the wild. And in the populations that we look at, they tend to be these really small populations that have kind of been habitat fragmentation or hunting has kind of caused the populations to become really contracted. And that means there's a lot of inbreeding then going on, and the likelihood you're going to find these genes being fixed, being kind of expressed, increases. Whereas in natural large populations, you don't see that kind of stuff happening. So we see it in the wild in these populations in about 2 to 4% of females producing. But in captivity, I get emails multiple times a week from people that have got parthenogens wanting to know if I want them or will I test them. And years ago, I used to test them, but I don't do it anymore. There's no benefit for me to do that.
Yeah. I think that it's very interesting to try to rationalize how this is happening in people's private collections, because I don't really see it often. I mean, I just hear about it. But what is your theory as to why you think inbred animals are more likely to do this?
It's just a matter of whenever animals inbreed, you're going to get some genes coming together in a small population that are expressed. That both animals have it. Whereas in an outbred population, the likelihood of that is very slim. So it's just when there's fewer animals breeding, there's an increased likelihood of seeing those kind of genes popping up, because it's going to be brother, sister, parent, offspring, cousin matings going on, and therefore the likelihood of seeing those is pretty high. And the same thing happens to us in captivity when we breed snakes. It's not uncommon for someone to come up and say, right, Warren, I want to buy a pair of these boas that are from this litter, and I want a male and a female, and they're going to breed them. And in time, they're going to sell offspring, and someone's going to buy a pair of those babies from that litter. So you just get subsequent rounds of inbreeding. You lose genetic diversity, but you increase the likelihood of seeing these kind of crazy genes popping up.
So I got a crazy question, and this is just a concept me and Keenan have talked about before. But when it comes to our reptiles, a lot of times we try to inbreed them for different morphs and just all types of aesthetically pleasing reasons. What do you feel like that is doing to this animal internally and genetically when we continue to do this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So Ron Tremper, who breeds or bred leopard geckos, I believe he inbred leopard gecko lines for about 26 generations or 30 generations. And over time, he found individuals that were shorter or had deformed skulls or had deformed limbs, but he also had animals that were just totally fine. So inbreeding can go two ways. In one case, it can be pretty bad because you can get those genes that cause those deformities. But in other lines, it can actually eliminate those genes, and you just get these healthy genes that stick together and do their good things. So it can be good or bad, but it's totally lineage specific. I can't turn around to you and say, yeah, you're fine inbreeding those for the next 30 years. It's really up to you to see what's going on. And unfortunately, in the reptile hobby, somebody breeds and finds that their animal doesn't have scales, and that's the next big morph. It doesn't mean that it's very good or very healthy for the animal, but that's the next big thing. So we cling on to these kind of deformities, like albinism's a deformity, anarthrism's a deformity, all of that kind of stuff, and we kind of covet these kind of mutations. But because there's a color mutation doesn't mean that that's not doing something crazy internally as well, because those genes have multiple functions. And you find that they can do kind of pretty bad things. So like motley genes in boas, while it creates that kind of cool pattern or lack of pattern. It also screws up. It causes spinal deformities. It causes kind of ocular deformities by the eyes. So it's pretty bad. But it's a total, specific case. Individual cases are totally different. And then the other thing that comes along is, well, what happens whenever we start stacking these things together? We might be seeing effects that are detrimental as well down the line, whereas separately they'd be fine, but combined they produce pretty screwed up animals. So I always support outbreeding whenever you can. If it's fine for fixing a trait, but once you do that, outbreed it and to generate diversity. The nice thing about kind of green tree pythons and emerald tree boas and so on is that we tend to outbreed. We don't often inbreed lines. So we get that diversity, or at least we outbreed in certain ways, which is beneficial for the animals.
I think it's that way now, but I think that's just from like talking to people about like previous lines. Like I think that did happen with a lot of lines. They just kind of like kept breeding the same animals back together, and they just kind of disappeared. They kind of went the way of the dodo. Not all of them, and I think that some people did a remarkable job preserving the lines, but a lot of them are gone. A lot of
the other thing was that whenever you think back to emeralds and Amazons and chondros and stuff before, people weren't thinking about localities, and they didn't know that there was 3 species, 4 species, whatever of green tree python, right? So they just bred everything to everything.
Yeah.
It wasn't a designer, it was just a locality cross, right? It was just and that increases genetic diversity in the offspring. So they're kind of starting with a stronger background genetically. The problem is whenever you've got the Arfax or the Yapen Islands or the Biaks, whatever, where you've got a smaller population to breed from, that's whenever you can lead to problems down the line. But even like you mentioned earlier on about wild caughts. Wild caughts have a very good place in this hobby. I've got a bunch of wild caught emeralds, but I spent a lot of time establishing them, but I couldn't have lines like my anaconda phase and stuff without having wild caught animals. And I plan to get some green tree pythons in the future if I see the ones that I want, and they're likely to be wild caught or farmed, right? But
farmed.
Yeah, right. But
farmed with a bunch of scars on it.
Yeah, they certainly have a place because they're bringing in levels of genetic diversity that we might not have in the captive population in the lines that they're currently seeing. So they definitely have a place. But you're right also that some of these lines that were there, they've died out because of inbreeding, but they've also died out because a whole bunch of people got out of it as well. Like whenever Rico died, his collection was split up. I got a couple of animals from that collection for emeralds, but that collection was split up. And it went everywhere, and therefore, some of those lines died because they just never bred again or never bred. And you've got other people that, Tony Nicolai was a phenomenal emerald tree boa breeder, but then, he had an illness that spread through his collection until they eliminated that. So you saw these really prominent lines that disappeared. And then other people just kind of keep themselves to themselves, and they don't promote themselves as breeding. There's a whole bunch of emerald breeders and green tree python breeders that just don't go onto Facebook and Instagram and they breed and they sell their offspring, and they've got some really nice locality animals.
Yeah, I got another question for you regarding that. Do you think that inbreeding chondros and any other snake can cause serious issues for animals when it comes to compromised immune systems and sterility? And that it just progressively over time just gets worse and worse.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And you see that across vertebrates and invertebrates. As you inbreed, you often find sterility issues. You find sperm deformities. Lower egg count. You find compromised immune systems. Absolutely, and you do that. The difference is, however, is that think about how we're keeping our animals. We tend to keep them pretty sterile, in that they're in our little enclosure. They're on a very strict heating and cooling regime. They're on a diet of healthy lab-bred mice every 2 weeks or whatever. So they're not being stressed at the same level. If they're in a collection that's got a bunch of wild-caught stuff as well with it, that could be carrying different pathogens, and there could be a problem there. Yeah. But it all depends on what we keep and how we're keeping them. But absolutely, with inbreeding over time will lead to immunocompromised animals, without a doubt. and sterility issues.
That was always one of my questions I had. So we also got another question from Chris. Thank you for submitting questions. If you guys got questions, put them in the chat. Uh, isn't there a viper a fer-de-lance viper that changes sex to reproduce? Do they partho as well? I guess parthogenically
Is it a
reproduce.
fer-de-lance?
So
Yeah,
fer-de-lance
It's
fer-de-lance.
a venomous
Yeah,
nature.
yeah, the fer-de-lance is not. Yeah, there's a lance head that does. I'm not sure about changing sex, but they are intersex animals where they can be male and female. But we've seen that in annulated tree boas in the past, and I've seen it in a ball python. But there's an island that has the lanceheads. I think they're golden lanceheads, and I haven't looked into this population enough. I looked into it years ago, but
I've seen some videos on
on
that
the coast of
island.
Brazil, and I believe that there are intersex animals there. I don't believe they produce parthenogenetically, but they could. You know, we've seen parthenogenesis in fer-de-lance, so we've seen it in some of the old world vipers as well. So it can occur, but I think they're intersex animals. I believe.
Yeah, it's Aquarius vipers.
Yeah.
I do got a question for you. Because it came from Pat. Pat says my Lasik brettle comes from founder stock of like 4 steaks or something. They're some of the most robust animals I've ever kept. Well, also, it's also problematic. That is a statement because Pat is probably one of the best keepers of all time.
Yeah. Hey, Pat.
Pat can make anything work when it comes to a snake, I imagine. But that is a question I've had for a lot of these animals. Like our populations that we have, they are started by like 4 or 5 snakes.
Rough scale pythons are a great example. Brettles pythons are interesting because I've done a bunch of work on carpet python genetics over the years, and there's all of these different lines of Brettles python, and we sequence them, and they're all the same. So whenever people say about I only want an Afors line or a Lasik line or a Harris line, genetically they're all the same. It's not as if they don't appear to have been collected from different areas, and they represent genetically distinct lineages. What they are is line bred animals. So whenever people tell me about line breeding, I kind of get a weird twinge in the back of my head, because line breeding is inbreeding.
Yeah,
Right.
it's kind of like when my wife says we got to spend some money on something.
Right. So it's like they only have line bred whatever line of this or that. It tells me that they just have really inbred animals. So I keep hog island boas, for example, but I've got multiple different genetically distinct lineages, and I never breed the lineage to the same lineage. I always outbreed them and sell them to maintain genetic diversity. But with Brettles pythons, they are genetically they lack diversity across those different lineages. But my God, Brettles pythons are robust. They're tanks. You can keep them at really cold temperatures. You can get warm. They can not feed them for 6 months. These things are just phenomenal. A lot of the carpet pythons they're really strong animals, and Brettles are interesting.
Yeah. Pat, you seem like you got a lot of questions. We can patch you in if you want to. I'll bring you in here. So when it comes to lizards, for instance, like geckos, does it happen outside of geckos? Do we see it in monitors or iguanas? But I would also have this question about iguanas because there always seems to be a bunch of iguanas together all the time.
So there was a paper on parthenogenesis in iguanas years ago, but it was never tested genetically. Undoubtedly, they do it. Monitors do it quite frequently. So the first paper came out on monitors. Some of the major papers, like there was a paper in 2006 in Nature that showed parthenogenesis in Komodo dragons. And a number of lines of Komodo dragons in zoos have a propensity to produce parthenogenetically. They produce male offspring. We've seen it in water monitors. We've seen it in a whole bunch of different species of monitor. They do it quite frequently. They'll produce male offspring. I'd like to follow those to see how well they do and how well they survive, but we don't have any real data to track them over time. You'll find we've got evidence of it in bearded dragons, in kind of water dragons, both Australian and Chinese water dragons. But then there's a whole line of other things that do it, like there's lizards, amoeba lizards, whiptails, some morning geckos, but they produce differently. They're a totally different mechanism of parthenogenesis, where their populations are only females. There's no males in the population, and therefore they produce only parthenogenetically. And they tend to be species that have evolved as hybrids from two different species, and they have increased chromosome counts and all that kind of stuff. So they're a different mechanism. They're quite different. But lizards, yeah, definitely, it's certainly occurring. And the problem is that you breed two iguanas together. One iguanas aren't commonly bred in captivity, unless they're albino and stuff like that. And even then, it's not common.
You just go get them off the street.
Yeah, and even right. And if you breed two iguanas together that are normal iguanas, well, how do you know you produced a parthenogen, right? Because it's quite common that there could be parthenogens in there, but because you had a male and a female together, you assume that they're sexually produced. And then very often as well is if they keep a lone female, it lays eggs, they throw all the eggs out, they don't check if there's any fertility. So for example, a couple of years ago, I did work with Quetzal Dwyer, who runs Reptilandia. He owns the Reptilandia in Texas.
I was just there about a month ago.
Oh, cool. I need to go to it. But Quetzal had called me up whenever he owned Park Reptilandia in Costa Rica. They had an American crocodile that produced a clutch of eggs. And Quetzal was aware of our work that we've been doing, my collaborator Gordon Shewitt, and he found a clutch of eggs from this American crocodile. And thankfully he took them out, he uncovered them, and they candled them, and they found that there was, out of the, I think 16, I think 8 of them appeared to be fertile. They had a band in the center with the egg, which indicates fertility. They incubated those, and they kind of died along the way, but they got to the point where one of them should have hatched and it never did, but they cut it open and there was a baby American crocodile in it that was parthenogen. So in that case, he knew to check the egg for fertility. A lot of people, if they've only got a lone female, they see eggs, they just dump them, right? So they could be producing parthenogenetically. And we've seen that in like corn snakes and king snakes and stuff like that there, and ball pythons. So, but across lizards, I think it happens just as common as across snakes. We just see it more often in snakes, in ball pythons, and in boas, because we keep ball pythons and boas in higher numbers. So probably the two most common snakes that we keep in captivity, And then with corn snakes, often whenever they produce clutches of eggs, if it's people that have a lone female and they just dump them. Whereas the breeders that have got a ton of corn snakes, because of all the morphs that are floating around in it, they see unusual ones and they just assume that those genes are in the parents, and it might be only in one of the parents, and the offspring might be parthenogens. So it can screw things up as well.
Do you think there could be like a clutch from like a snake or a lizard where like a portion of that clutch is was fertilized by a male and another portion of the clutch was parthogenic?
Oh yeah, it happens. Yeah, we've shown that. Yeah, and we're actually we're waiting on some samples to come in from a rare viper species from a friend that they should be coming in next week. But that shows that there as well. We can see it in the offspring that it's some of them are parthenogens and some of them are not. But it definitely happens, which again causes problems for people that produce these offspring. They just assume one is something and it's sexually produced and it's not. It's a parthenogen. So yeah, it's crazy that it happens, but it's certainly, I've had it happen in my collection with boas. I've bred some snakes together before and produced some leopard boas in the litters, and the father didn't have any genes for leopard. So I knew, but the mother did. So I knew they were parthenogens, and it was only like 2 out of 20 babies.
I mean, that's real interesting, because in the chondro hobby, there's a lot of clutches that come out where it does seem like a good portion of the clutch is actually really healthy, and like another portion of the clutch really may not seem healthy at all, and they look very different in the end.
Yeah, it could certainly be that. The other thing that happens is, reptiles have a really great ability to store sperm. We've shown rattlesnakes storing sperm for 7 years before they use it and producing healthy offspring.
We got a lot of incels, like human incels on Earth. I'm pretty sure they're storing a lot of sperm cells for 7 years too.
The crazy thing with these snakes, they store it. We've had rattlesnakes that are bred once, and over the space of 7 years, they'll produce multiple litters that are all healthy, just like corn snakes can over 1 or 2 seasons. But rattlesnakes seem to be the king of that. Vipers seem to be the king of that. There to be able to store sperm and produce parthenogenetically. They're just kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And and as Patrick says, androgenesis is the really weird one. But we're wrapping up a paper on androgenesis. Androgenesis is like the opposite of parthenogenesis. It's where the offspring is produced by a female but has none of her DNA. It has her mitochondrial DNA but doesn't have her regular DNA. It only has the father's DNA, which is kind of really screwed up. And we're seeing that in pythons and in boas as well.
That sounds like that movie, The Changeling, where like the baby just kind of looks like the mom, but it's really like a goblin baby.
Thank you.
I know that sounds ridiculous, but maybe there's like goblin baby pythons. I don't know.
Yeah. But yeah, reptile reproduction is it's certainly kind of screwed up. I know that a lot of people ask me to test offspring, ball pythons for parthenogenesis, and I don't do it anymore. I just pass them on to the guys over at Reptile Genetics Inc. or whatever. They're pretty close to me, so I always recommend just go to them. I just don't have the with the methods that we use now. It would be way too expensive for me to do it, and I get nothing from it. It's different if it's like a new unusual species where we haven't shown it, and we can get something out of it. But just I don't test them just for the sake of it anymore. It's kind of like stamp collecting, and I'm not into stamp collecting. Just to show that it doesn't mean anything to me, So we don't do that anymore. So most people, I just got contacted yesterday about doing some stuff with iguanas, and it's just too expensive to do that. It's not going to be beneficial for the person.
Do you think that it could be a possibility? Because I also say this about when it comes like to reptile medications and things like that. It's like the price of this stuff has to come down, but in order for it to come down, there's got to be like a serious need for it. And like I don't think that like the people that are giving grants out care as much about reptiles.
No,
it's like
No, they could be interested in reptiles, but not in the questions that we're asking, right? So there's no way I could ever get the National Science Foundation to give me $500,000 to study reptile parthenogenesis. Not with what we've done, it's a totally different thing. If we used it to address different questions relating to some kind of reproductive anomalies, maybe we could get money. But I've got no interest in trying to pursue that. The grant funding rates is really difficult. People think scientists get all this money. The funding rate right now for most research is about 4%. So about 4% of the grants that you write get funded. And it takes about 3 to 6 months to write a good grant. So that gives you an idea of how often you get funded. It's really difficult. So
I figured as much.
Parthenogenesis. Yeah. But they're really interesting questions, and I think it's informed a lot about, we've learned so much about it because of reptile keepers. Like we wouldn't have any of the papers on boas or pythons or whatever if it wasn't for the reptile hobby. So it shows a real place for tying, reptile keeping in with kind of academic research, which I think is really cool because there's often a divide. There, people think that, because you're an academic or a scientist that you're, kind of against reptile keeping or whatever. But I think the two kind of go together hand in hand with this here.
Yeah. I also got a question. You think there ever be a like with studying parthenogenesis, more or anthrogenesis, do you think there would ever be the capability to like completely reproduce a clone of one of these snakes?
Yeah. It's cloning is actually it's kind of routine now for many species. It's just it's the desire, right? There's people cloning dogs. There's cattle are cloned. The whole stuff like that there. So it's certainly there, but I just don't think anybody would want to invest the money into it. It's not inexpensive. You look at the costs that people are paying to clone dogs, and they're in the $500,000 and all that kind of stuff. Nobody's doing that there for a snake. But technology in time will it'll get cheaper, and you will see the ability. Just whether you want to, what's the point? Why not just breed different lineages and produce cool animals? Why do you want to clone an animal?
Listen, I'm here to tell you, if you told people in the chondro community that you could produce an exact clone of this snake, there's a lot of people that will buy it. Even if you told them like the animal might live at the oldest to be 8, there'd be a lot of people that would be like, I'll take that gamble. I wouldn't,
Maybe,
but there'd be a lot of people
maybe
that
it's
would.
it's
For real.
going to come down in time. So I'm sure we'll see it at some point in time. But yeah, who knows? Like literally, it's funny. Maybe 10 years ago or 8 years ago, I didn't think that we were close to being able to identify genes for albinism and for all those different things in snakes. And now it's straightforward. It's just technology changes. It makes these massive leaps, and it makes those things capable. And achievable and within grasp. So I'm sure cloning at some point will come down in price, and I'm sure people will undertake cloning. I know that the issue with cloning reptiles, if they're so at the moment they can't clone. I believe they can't clone anything that comes from an egg as a shelled egg. So this is why we're not going to see the dodo, and we're not necessarily going to see the passenger pigeon being resurrected. Anytime soon, unless they get past that technology. But mammals that are born in an amniotic, or animals that are born in an amniotic sac, then they can certainly clone those. So we'll see what happens with pythons, but I don't know if it's going to be anytime soon. But you never know. Again, it could make these massive leaps. I don't know.
I think that there would be a lot of people that would. I just have a feeling like when it comes to some of these designer animals and how sought after they are, if you could do it, efficiently, I think that a lot of people would.
Yeah.
Does it take the fun out of it? Maybe,
Yeah. So,
just
so
maybe.
that's where I think the genetic testing for traits it takes the fun out of it. It makes it I know exactly what I'm doing here. Whereas I've always felt that part of the fun has been that kind of producing animals and then breeding them together and hoping you're going to hit the right thing. And it's taken more effort, but yeah, I don't know. Technology changes, so it and it changes ultimately for the better. We get much more information out of the stuff. We can achieve our goals, but yeah, it's just how we use it.
Well, I mean, with technology like this, we'll eventually produce Jurassic Park and
Oh yeah.
cause
Well,
great
well,
damage to
yeah.
the world.
We'll never clone a dinosaur. It's
You
never
don't,
going to happen.
you don't think
Uh,
that people would end up cloning a dinosaur?
you can't get DNA. There's no DNA. DNA is deleted. It's not going to happen. Even a mammoth is not going to be cloned either. So we're very unlikely to see a cloned mammoth, and
I don't know.
because you can't
Keep
find
giving it
any
time.
you can't find any living cells. You can't find any
Yeah,
DNA. So unless some of the Siberian permafrost melts and there's a perfectly preserved mammoth with some live cells still, that's the only way. So
that does scare me. Like I feel like if people could, they would definitely be producing velociraptors, uh, just for fun. Like there'd be a whole bunch of rich dudes riding velociraptors or the Kentucky
yeah,
Derby and shit.
I think we're pretty safe. I don't think it's going to happen.
I don't know. Like we always say things like that, and rich people come out with it.
I don't know. I'm pretty confident that one's not doing it.
I hope not. I don't want to see people riding velociraptors. I don't want to see Paris Hilton with a T Rex. I just don't want to see shit like that. I just feel like it's bad for humanity. Um, so what do you see as the future of reptile breeding at this point as a whole? Um, because we are still seeing like new species get introduced, but we are still seeing people really seeking out these designer lines. And how do you feel like these two? Because people breed these animals together all the time. Like,
Mhm.
what do you see for the future? Because I do also see that there'll be at some point in time there'll be more bans on importing animals.
Yeah, without a doubt. But I honestly think the hobby is going from strength to strength. Right, yeah, we have a whole group of people that are just mass producing ball pythons, and it's always going to be the case, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing. Price adjustments occur, but we're seeing much more interesting kind of breedings going on as well. So a lot more people are being successful at breeding emerald tree boas. Northern emerald tree boas have always been rare. Captive born babies have always been relatively rare in the hobby, and we've got some great people producing really good litters of those this year, probably more than I've seen in a long time. So people are really putting the effort into those. Same thing with green tree pythons. We've got people that keep localities, and therefore they're maintaining locality animals. You got people that are going for the designers. You got some that do both. That's great, as long as they're maintaining their animals and they're breeding and they're successful. I think that's wonderful. And as you say, we're seeing some of these animals that were a lot less common, kind of coming into the limelight. Like I keep Dunn's pythons, and Dunn's pythons were thought to be extinct in the hobby until Nick and Ryan produced a couple of clutches over the last few years, and they gave me some, and I've been working in those. Hopefully, I'll breed them this year. The last time I saw Dunn's pythons was in the mid 1990s, back in the UK, and then they disappeared, but they're back again. So I think people are interested in diversifying collections. They don't just want to have every color of ball python. They're like having little bits and pieces of everything else. Like whenever I moved to the US for 6 or 7 years, I only had boas. And then thankfully I diversified and got into all the other things, and it kind of spices up the collection a little bit, gives it a little bit more flavor and a little bit more fun. But the fact that we've got some really great shows now, so people can sell their animals, you got the ease of shipping them with FedEx and all of the companies that are assisting with that there, whether it's Ship Your Reptiles or Redline or whatever. I think that makes things a lot easier. You got numerous companies that are producing rodents that are expensive as shit, but they're still producing them so you can get them, right? You can get every kind of cage and whatever you need. I think the hobby can only go from strength to strength. The issue will be where bans are coming into place. You're going to see. I've been a board member of US ARC for the last, I think, 17 years. I've been on the board of directors, and you see these bans coming in and what it takes to fight them. And thankfully, US ARC is in a really strong position because people are donating, and it's bringing in money that we're using to be able to fight a lot of these bans that pop up in these different counties and different states and so on. But that will be an issue, and you will see issues with the ban of import of animals. I wouldn't be shocked if you see a lot more ban on Indonesian animals coming in, and that'll cut down on your number of green tree pythons and all that kind of stuff. So, or limitations at least of animals. It's going to take a while before countries realize that there can be a harvestable number that's viable. And only whenever that really starts kicking into place will you see change. But with the rate of deforestation and the rate of land use change and populations declining, it's not a good sign for animals. So therefore, we need to have our arc of animals. I always recommend getting a diversity of animals, of genetic diversity of animals, for you to play with, because you don't know what's around the corner. Next year they could turn around and say, right, there's no more imports of green tree pythons, and then you're stuck with what's here. So think wisely about what you keep and how you breed.
Yeah, and I think that's actually, I think that everything you said is actually fairly, true from what I'm seeing, because we don't really know what bans are around the corner. I mean, we're living, fancy free right now, but to be honest with you, just seeing how this thing is going, it just kind of seems to me that we are not priority when it comes to animal rights. Like these people that make these bans and rules, they don't really care about the reptile keepers.
We
And it
don't have
does
the
suck
money.
for us.
We don't have the money that's equivalent to what they get.
Yeah.
You talked about those little ads on TV late at night. That brings in a lot of money for kind of animal rights kind of aspects. And US ARC, while it's doing well at the moment, will never bring in that kind of money. It's only that we've got a really good group of people in US ARC that are really investing time and effort to fight a lot of these things. So that it's always going to be an issue. We keep animals that are not considered kind of necessarily mainstream or normal, even though the number of households keeping reptiles is probably now more than households keeping fish, and yet still we're seen as kind of the outsiders.
I gotta ask you this question as a member on the US ARC board. Why, and I know this would be really, really difficult to do, but have you guys ever actually considered trying to actually, track some of these animals? The same way like a lot of animals are tracked. Because like to me it just seems like we as reptile keepers, we all just, nobody knows anything officially. I mean, there's lineage charts, but nobody knows anything officially. Do you think that that would make us more legitimate in the eyes?
Yeah, so it's not that's not something really that USARC is there for.
Yeah,
But I've been contacted in the past about my interest in working with people to develop kind of genetic lineages of animals, right? You know, where you can genotype animals and have a genetic fingerprint of them, like a 23andMe kind of thing, right?
yeah.
And where you can keep pedigrees kind of pure. The problem is that it's just so much work, and there's not a lot of money in it to do that there. So it's not viable for me to do it. So like anything I do through the university, if somebody wanted to pay me to develop a genetic testing for a color or a pattern morph, it might cost about $12,000 to develop that, right? To get everything worked out.
Wow.
The university, if they pay me 12,000, the university takes a chunk of that money, right, to keep the
Yeah.
lights on in the buildings and all that. There, I have to pay technicians to do the work. It's not financially viable. So I thought about getting into genetic testing to identify morphs a number of years ago, and we've done several with boas, and it just turned out it's not viable to take it to a company within the university, and I don't have the time to do it outside it. But for lineages, I think we just have to be responsible. Like I think there's no reason, Nick Mutton does great stuff with his lineage charts. There's a number of people that, you know, uh, whenever you look at the old Signal Herp stuff, he had great lineage charts for his
Yeah.
animals. There's no reason why we can't
Yeah.
do that, right? Especially if you're getting animals that are imported. Just take nice pictures of them and start putting together a lineage chart in PowerPoint or whatever. It doesn't take much to do it. I've
Some
got
people.
data for all of I've got lineage charts for all of the kind of main lineages that I've worked with. And even for the wild caught stuff, they get introduced into those lineages whenever they breed. So I try to maintain that. And I also, for all of my animals, I keep a sample of shed skin that I extract DNA from. So ultimately I've got a genetic lineage, but not everybody can really do that. But it's something that's down to us. That's not something that USARC will do.
Some people do make some pretty detailed lineage
Yeah.
charts with pictures and everything. So shout out to those guys. I'm not one of those guys.
Yeah.
I'm actually the complete opposite.
Yeah, like
Not one of those.
I don't keep any records when it comes to feeding or defecation.
Hey, you like me?
Yeah. I stopped that years and years ago. What I do when I'm like breeding animals, I'll put a bit of tape on the enclosure whenever it's like an ovulation or a post-ovulation shed, and I'll track
Okay.
those dates. But at the end of the season, I don't write them in a book. I just take that tape off and it goes in the trash, and I start again fresh the next year because I've been doing it for 30 years, so I kind of know how to breed the snakes. But I don't keep any records like that anymore. I used to, and then we had a flood in our basement in Oklahoma, and my all of my books that had all the data in it got destroyed. And I thought, I'm not starting again. But I do have on my computer. I've got lineage charts for my snakes for the main projects on my computer.
I mean, that's good. I think lineage charts as I've gone on, they are important, but I don't keep any records on adults at all. Like I don't even think about it. Like I get shamed for it, but I don't really give a shit.
Even with
Babies,
babies.
yeah. I'll
Well,
keep
yeah,
doing
with
babies.
I do babies up to 10 meals. After they've had 10 feeds, I don't track that anymore because I know they're established.
Yeah.
So that's like people have been trying to get me to get into this one of those reptile tracking softwares. I forget which one it is.
I have Reptile Buddy, but I gotta be honest with you, I don't really use it. Like I
Yeah, so
logged into it. I realized the last time I logged into it is like it's problematic if I show this to anybody else.
for me, it's like, right, I've got 100 and whatever number of animals. I don't feed them all at the one time. I feed about half of them one night, and then I defrost half of again what I need the next night and kind of work it. I don't have time to go through 50 snakes or 60 snakes and say, right, you add a rat. Okay, let me put that in the system, and you add this. I'd be there all night, and I just don't have the time for it. So while I like that people can do that, and I think it's great for their business, it really doesn't work for me. I'm just completely a hobbyist. It's not a business for me, and therefore I don't really need to track animals to that extent. So I don't use that.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think that some people they do like records Some people like weighing their snakes every day. I'm not gonna say no names, but
I've never
Michael
done that
Marsh.
either.
Uh, some people they do like it, and I think that that is part of it.
Mhm.
It is also cool to see because some you might have a question about something that somebody that keeps records. They might have the records to like give you an example, but generally speaking, and keeping chondros, I don't think you really need to keep detailed records about a lot of things involving these snakes.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me about the weights of my emeralds when I breed them and stuff, and I'm like, I don't know. They're eating medium to large rats. I don't know what they weigh. I'm not taking them out to weigh them. They're not the tamest animals, and I don't want to get a handful of teeth. Just to be able to say that was 1,000 grams, or 1,500 grams. No, I don't need it. So, yeah, I can tell that it's roughly this size and eats that meal. There we go.
Yeah, some snakes, they're not really a dream to be messing around with.
No,
They just
no.
kind of suck.
So
They
but
look
one
nice.
thing that's true. But one thing with that tracking software is I think that can build up lineage data as well. So that is kind of
Yeah,
nice whenever people can do that. But it's just having the motivation and the inclination to do that, and I just at the moment don't have the time to do it.
it's okay. I don't have any motivation to do a lot of stuff. Uh, my job as a snake keeper is to keep animals fed, clean, and freshly watered.
That's it.
Uh, if somebody was to buy a snake from me, I'll tell them the last time I think it ate, which probably was in
Right.
recent memory.
Yeah.
Uh, but like honestly, I really don't think that it's necessary. Like once the animal goes beyond pinkies, I'm not tracking any of that shit.
No,
Like
I don't think you need to.
they're like everybody that's like on the same line or whatever. I can go down the line and feed them. Um, they're getting big. Like they're eating roughly the same meals at the same time. And I don't think that's super necessary to do that. But some people do. They do feel it. They do.
Yeah. Well, I think
Not
that
me
there
though.
is whenever you got animals, if one didn't feed.
Yeah.
And you can check it the next time. If it didn't feed then, right, there could be an issue. But you generally know that. You don't need a software to see that there, at least with the number of animals that I have. So, I think it's beneficial for many people. I just don't have the time for it or the inclination to do it.
Pat just uses index cards. I know this for a fact. I've
Yeah, I
received
used to do that,
index
but
cards.
I don't do that either. I used to have a whole bunch of index cards for each animal, and again, I just stopped.
There's gonna be people that see this that are gonna be like, "Wow, Warren, you're just as bad as Travis," and that's not the case.
Absolutely, yeah. I can sleep with Eugenia, but I just don't give a shit about noting that my snake ate. I don't feed on a schedule. It's not. I don't turn around and feed every 7 to 14 or whatever. I feed it roughly whenever I remember to feed. And yeah, I don't need it for that.
I like with the babies, I keep on a schedule, but like with the adults, like I try to keep a schedule, but like that doesn't work out because like I'll plan to feed babies and like I'll have to feed babies because they're babies. But like when it comes to adults, like something else might happen and I may only have time to feed the babies. So
Mhm.
like nobody's ever consistently getting like the adults, they're never getting consistently fed, every 3 weeks or every 2 weeks. Um, just because it works out that way most of the time, but a lot
Mhm.
of times it doesn't. And then you look at adults and you're just like, you don't really need to eat. Like you don't really seem like you want to move around right now. Like I'll give you a few days. You start moving around, then I'll come over here and feed you some. But yeah, I just don't feel like that's necessary with adults.
No, I
I
feed
could live.
some of my adult stuff. Might get 8 to 10 meals a year, right? The babies will get fed every 5 to 10 days, depending what I remember. But there's, and I scale it up. Obviously, as they get older, they get less. But most of my adults, like my adult boas, get fed once a month or once every 3 weeks. Same with the tree boas. So I'm a very infrequent feeder. And then, of course, I don't feed from November through to March. None of the adults get a meal, or the subadults. Only the babies continue to get fed.
Hmm. So why exactly do you go such a long period of time without feeding?
Because the temperature is dropping at that point, and
Mhm.
I temperature cycle, or sorry, I food cycle over temperature cycling mainly. Lots of different things will trigger animals to breed, to go through that kind of egg and sperm kind of production phase. And it can be, if they stop feeding and then once they kick back in again, there's a load of food, then it's time to reproduce. So that's the main trigger that I've used for boas and pythons over the last 30 years. Um, a lot of people do it even more extreme. I know like Nick Mutton can be pretty extreme with his feeding. I think Vin Russo could be pretty extreme with his feeding for like ball pythons and so on. It's just one of those methods that we need, or we use. You can look at some island populations, for example, of some of these small island populations of boas, and they might feed for 3 months. They'll feed kind of like gluttons for 3 months. They'll eat everything they can when like passerine birds are moving in and migrating, but then they'll have 9 months where they don't get to feed at all. So it just simulates kind of stuff we see in the wild. You can go into rain. I've spent enough time in rainforests that you go in certain seasons, you don't see a lot of food availability for some of these small animals. You don't see a lot of amphibians or a lot of rodents. You go at other times of the year, you see a whole bunch of amphibians and a whole bunch of rodents. They're feeding actively then. So I just kind of go with that their process. But I tend to get to the 1st of November, and everything stops getting fed, and then January 1st, I start pairing animals up, and then end of February, beginning of March, I'll start feeding things again. And that's whenever you see the real activity. I can pretty much guarantee that ovulations are going to happen pretty soon after that. Feeding starts again because they're into that, feeding mode, and that's going to, the food is plenty, and therefore it's time to reproduce. So it's always worked for me for that there.
So I think that in the chondro community, like people have different ways of doing things, and I gotta ask you this because you're mostly a boa guy. Does your method of cycling differ from a lot of other breeders, or is everybody on track? Because for chondros, if I tell somebody I temp cycle, my version of temp cycling is going to be different from somebody else's.
Yeah,
My version of food cycling is going to be very different from somebody else's.
yeah, but I think that's normal anyway. Like I don't think there's one kind of magic bullet that does everybody. Like how I keep snakes in terms of breeding them in North Carolina was different than in Oklahoma, and Virginia is different than Oklahoma. There's small things that we change up. Some people don't food cycle. Some people don't temperature cycle. Some people don't do any of it. And they're really successful. I've always been kind of the mind of whatever works for you, do it. But I know that what's worked for me for 30 years, and I don't tend to change things once they're working. And I've been really successful in breeding most species that I've kept. I don't seem to mix that up. I don't see the need to. But what I do could be totally different than what works for you.
I think that that's just kind of how it goes. It's odd, and I think it's one of the coolest things about breeding reptiles is knowing that everybody has some different method. And if somebody teaches you how to do something, you're probably not going to do it exactly how they do it. You're
Yeah.
going to come with your own method. And then, it's also partially with chondro breeders. We're breeding some of us are breeding at different times of the year that are abnormal. And then if you live in certain areas of the country, you may not get your temperature drop like somebody else will get in September. You might not get it really realistically till the end of November.
Yeah.
Or something like that. So I think that's cool. I think that's real cool.
Yeah, like I see it now, on Instagram, people have got their boas breeding. Mine aren't even going to be introduced for another kind of 2 months, so and at that point they're halfway through gestation and they're ready to produce babies. But mine, I don't get babies until kind of June, July, August, September time. But it's consistent every year. I get it the same kind of thing, and there was one year I tried to do that and breed them earlier, and it didn't work. I just got a whole bunch of slugs and things crapped out on me, and even animals that I paired earlier didn't really do what they should have done until later in the season when they normally would. So I just keep my systems kind of pretty much the same across the board. Everything gets fed for a period of the year, and then they stop feeding, which is the best time of the year because then you're not cleaning up anything. It's wonderful. You just have to clean babies that are left over or whatever. But it's nice having that kind of 3 or 4 month break from feeding it. But then once you kick back into feeding, then things really kick up for breeding. So it just works for me. The triggers kind of work for that there.
Yeah, I got a mail like every time I go, like, cause I had all my snakes are in the garage. So like in the morning, I gotta go get my dogs out of their cage, and like I'll go in there and like this male, like he'll just be pressed against the glass, because it's breeding season and there's nobody for him to breed with.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I think he's trying to tell me something. I think he's saying if you don't let me use my wee wee, I'm gonna press it up against this glass and make you see it.
Yeah.
I think that's how he thinks. He's an asshole too. So I think that when it comes to like the whole temperature cycle and all these things when it comes to breeding, like this all real interesting, especially hearing it from somebody who breeds boas.
Yeah, it's not a it's not a difficult thing to do. Like even I don't consider breeding emeralds, tree boas as being difficult. It's just getting once you got your animals that are healthy and established, then they do what they do, and don't overfeed them, don't underfeed them, don't keep them too hot, don't keep them too cold. It's just getting that Goldilocks zone and everything's good. And that's that's why we're seeing now more people breeding things like Timor pythons and Boleyn's pythons and the things that we thought were impossible to breed. People are doing it now because they're having established healthy animals that are in their routines.
I keep saying this, and then people like they like always gloss over this, but I'm telling you, with the advent of more information and the availability of it in different places and podcasts and things like that, a lot of these high prices for a lot of these snakes, it's probably gonna go away because there's gonna be a lot more people reproducing snakes.
Well, there's that, but there's also only a certain market for high-end animals.
Yeah.
Right. There's only a certain number of people that want to spend 15,000 on a pair of Boleyn's pythons.
Yeah.
Right. So in time there will be price adjustments, and especially if those captive bred animals turn out to be easier to breed.
Yeah.
So for example, Ryan gave me a pair of captive bred Timor pythons, and it'll be interesting to see in 5 or 6 years' time if they breed easier than wild caught animals that have notoriously been more difficult to breed. And if that happens, if they are more easy to breed, just like if we see the same thing for white lip pythons and so on, then you're going to see prices kind of correcting for a bit. But there's only a certain market for a 10-foot black iridescent snake that costs 12 grand.
Yeah, because there's a market for it. There's always going to be the market for it. But what happens when you have these animals and they're how do I put it? What happens when you have these animals and you have one year you have 20 of these animals being produced, and then the next year you have 60?
Oh yeah,
And
that's exactly it. Yeah,
it's just gonna keep going up and going up. Like there's gonna be so many of these snakes because they're just and the monitors. Like like I've seen Morph Market over the years. There's a lot more people like participating than there was before.
Mm-hmm.
And a while ago, a lot of stuff, most of the stuff seemed to be it was certain species, not all of them, but it used to be mostly like wild caught or farm bred. But now a lot of this stuff is just like there's a lot of captive bred stuff for animals that there really wasn't a lot for 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, which is great. Yeah,
it's
great to see it happening. We just have to get to the point where we're not overproducing, and then the things sit for a long time. That's the issue.
I think that always comes with it. I think that overproducing always comes with it. Let's hope that we can.
But then self-correction as well. The people that overproduce 1 year either don't produce, they get out because they're just so stressed of having to clean 70 reticulated python babies, and they get out, or else they don't kind of breed the same way in the coming years. So I think there's always self-correction. You get the ups and downs, the peaks and the troughs. And I can't fault people for breeding snakes and pairing animals together and a higher than normal frequency producing, but I think there's always self-correction in the hobby. I've seen it over the years. Over 30 years, I've watched Brazilian rainbow boas go from $900 each to $90 each to $900 each to 90, and they go up and down and they finally stabilize. Same thing with Hog Island boas, and they come and go. Same thing with Dumerils boas, and I think there's always that kind of self-correction that occurs. So I'm not stressed about it. I think the hobby's in a really strong state. I think the availability that we've got is incredible. We're at a point now where if you had told me 30 years ago about what I could keep, I would have thought you were insane, and the ease of getting many of these things and the cost of them, So I think things are going really well, and I think they're going to only get better, especially now that people are having more success in getting green tree python babies to feed or emerald tree boas to breed and so on. I think it's a great thing for the hobby. Of course, if you get into it and you think, right, I'm gonna buy 50 females and breed them all, and I'm gonna make some big, massive money financially, I don't know if that's gonna work. But if we're realistic, I think things will be fine.
You know what I always think about? I always think about reptile shows in the '90s and just how absolutely weird they were, compared to like now. Yeah, I mean, if you went to a reptile show in the '90s, there was a bunch of guys wearing like military surplus clothing. Like that was mostly the scene.
But
where
you also saw like an incredible diversity. Like years ago, I used to love the kind of August, September, October issue of Reptile and Amphibian Hobbyist coming out, because they would have the photos and the updates from what happened at the Daytona show, right? And that's where you saw like all of this diversity of animals. In the times that I've gone to Daytona, yes, there's been more diversity of animals probably at Daytona than many other shows that I've gone to, but there's also been 9.5 million ball pythons, and 36,000 crested geckos. And so maybe the extreme numbers, but we still see. But in the '90s, even in the early 2000s, you saw some really interesting stuff coming through, like animals that we don't have anymore. Clouded boas and St. Lucia boas, they're not in captivity anymore, really. I know of one pair of clouded boas in the US. I know of one pair of St. Lucia boas in Europe. But you got animals there that you never see again, so it was an interesting kind of place. You had the real dedicated herpers, and then but you get that nowadays. Go to any reptile show and you see a real interesting group of people. I've never taken my wife to a reptile show, and I never will, just because it's an odd bunch of folks. I love them, but it's an odd bunch of folks.
I took my wife to Tinley, and she was just like, "These are the fucking weirdos that you be talking to all the time, like these fucking guys." I'm like, "Yeah, these are."
If my wife thought, she's like, "You're a fucking professor and you're hanging around with this numbnuts," I'm like, "No, they're good people. I love going to reptile show."
Yeah, so I think that like with Tinley, I will say this, at even Tinley, you're right mostly about the ball pythons, but here for the last show that they had in Texas, you really could only bring you can only bring certain things, and the list was not very long. I know you couldn't even bring green trees.
Yeah, so my friend Bob Ashley is one of the guys that puts that show on, and I know that he was kind of stressed about the limited diversity of animals that you could bring to it. So, I don't know what I used to go to Arlington, once or twice a year whenever I lived in Oklahoma, because it was only 4 hours away. But I don't know when I'll be back to the Texas show. But I want to go to Daytona again. I haven't been there in a while. And I went to Tinley last year, and it was a lot of fun. And it was huge, and there was a decent diversity of animals. Yeah, there was, 8 billion ball pythons, but there was still a lot of other cool things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people, like, even for a person like me that doesn't keep ball pythons, I do enjoy seeing some ball pythons. I ain't gonna lie, I do enjoy seeing them.
Really cool. And there's a couple that I would get as desk pets from my office, but I wouldn't invest in them. And I think some people, it works for some people, and for a lot of people it doesn't work if they try to go beyond the kind of having a couple. I think that's where things like chondros and emeralds are really cool, because you're never going to get to the point where you got 150 of them. Not normally, right? There's not a lot of people that have that kind of number, like the ball python groups. But you're going to have a group of animals and they're not easy to breed. You're not going to make everyone breed every year. Each time you breed it, so it's going to be a bit more controlled. But yeah, I think that's why it's a bit safer with the tree pythons and the tree boas.
Yeah, I mean it's all interesting, just to see like how things have changed. I just really want to see what it's going to look like in 5 years from now, because I honestly feel like it's going to be very different 5 years from now. Um, but I don't know if I want. It's we've gone over. Um, do you got anything that you want to say before we get out of here?
No, I don't. I'm always happy to talk about anything to anyone. It's the joys of being Irish. You can talk shit for many hours.
Yes, me too. I can talk a lot of shit for hours. Usually it's not snakes. Usually it's something completely ridiculous. Some of the theories I have, I don't understand like how ridiculous or scary they sound till they come out of my mouth, and I look at the other person's face
And you
when
say
they
their
hear
face.
me say this. I'm just like, yeah, I shouldn't.
I'm only
have said
shitting you.
that to
That's right.
myself. But it's been enjoyable. I know you told me not to call you Dr. Booth, but Dr. Warren Booth, we love to have you again. I definitely got some more genetics questions that I want to ask you. I think I got to them kind of late, but I definitely got some more stuff I want to ask you. But we greatly appreciate it. I don't know what happened to Keno.
I think
I know there's gonna
he
be
fell
some.
over and died. Yeah.
Yeah, I know there's gonna be some Keno memes tomorrow. I know, I know there's gonna be some Keno memes tomorrow. He's gonna be upset, but
He
he
was
just disappeared.
he was looking a bit delicate at the beginning when we were doing the sound check, so I didn't know how long he was going to last.
Yeah,
He
I
could
know
literally
he was
he could literally be lying on the floor there, and you can't see him.
Yeah, I need to call. I need to
Get
hit.
an emergency call just to
I
check in
need
on
to
him.
hit. I need to hit Brittany up to make sure the Keto's still alive. I'm gonna send Khalil a text message, be like, "Man, make sure your dad all right." But he hung in there. He did this rocking thing for a while. I thought he was like eating something. I was
That's
confused.
what I thought. I don't know whether he was snoring or whether he was. Yeah, he was.
Hey, I ain't
For
gonna
a
lie.
bit.
He could do it better than me. If I start falling asleep, listen, I snore real loud. Like you're gonna be like, Travis, what the fuck? but anyway, Warren, it's been wonderful.
Cool,
Thank
man.
you for coming through, and we love to have you back.
Yeah, it's great. I enjoyed it. Anytime. All right. Take
That's
care.
been us for the CBR. Y'all take care. Good night.